Dead America. Spokane. Part 1. By Derek Slayton. Chapter 1. Day 0+66. The sun poked up from behind the horizon, bathing the downtown corridor of Spokane in a warm glow. The reflection off of the freshly fallen snow illuminated the shadows on the street, revealing just how empty they were. Most of the local survivors had since been moved over to the safe zone in Seattle, leaving a relative skeleton crew of soldiers and civilians to hold down the fort. Despite the lack of manpower, the job was a relatively easy one for Captain Page to manage. Before the invasion of Seattle, the military had wiped out virtually every creature roaming the streets of Spokane and the surrounding metro area. While there were still thousands of ghouls locked up in homes and businesses, they were of little threat to the couple thousand remaining people in the city. Despite the relative safety in the military headquarters located on the southern edge of downtown, unease continued to fester within the gut of Captain Page. The looming threat of militia strikes kept her up at night and factored into every decision she made as the overseer of Spokane. Page stood at the window of her third-floor office, looking down at the eerily empty streets below. She ran her hands through her shoulder-length blonde hair, feeling the grit and grime that had built up over the last few days. "If I don't find a hot shower soon, I swear I'm going to throw somebody off a rooftop," she said to herself. Despite talking to herself, her voice carried to just outside her office, reaching the ears of her assistant, Cody. He leaned out from his desk, poking his head through the door. "Did you say something, Captain?" Cody asked. "It's nothing, Cody." "Are you doing okay, Captain?" "It's just nerves. I always get this way when I know I'm about to talk to the general." "You're going to do great, Captain." "I'm glad one of us thinks so." "Is there anything I can get you?" Cody offered. Paige looked down at her watch, seeing that it was a few minutes before 8. "If you can scrounge up a pot of hot water and some tea bags, that would be fantastic." "The cups and tea are already set up in the conference room, and the kettle is on the hot plate." "What would I do without you, Cody?" "Let's hope you never have to find out, because I'm not really qualified to do much else." Captain Page cracked a smile as she walked over to her desk, grabbing a notebook and file folder before heading to the door. As she crossed the threshold, she paused, looking out at the sea of people moving about the office. A few dozen people, mostly military, working on various tasks as hard as they could, cataloging supplies, monitoring sightings of zombies and militia alike. While it seemed mundane, it was vitally important to not just their survival, but the survival of Seattle as well. "Cody?" she called. Her assistant spoke up, interrupting her as he anticipated the question. "The video uplink is squared away and will be going live in about 5 minutes. And Sergeant Burke is awaiting you in the conference room." Page didn't respond, only giving him a smile and nod before walking across the busy floor towards the conference room in the middle of the building. Inside sat a short, stocky soldier sitting at attention across from the door. His clean-shaven head was a distinct contrast to the full beard on his face. Upon noticing the captain entering the room, he popped upright, giving a salute. "Good morning, Captain Page," Sergeant Burke greeted. "Please take a seat, Sergeant." "It's a little too early in the morning for that kind of formality." Burke gave a subtle nod as he took a seat, immediately opening up his own notebook and file folder filled with printouts and imagery. He waited to speak until the captain had situated herself at the table. "Captain, have you read my report?" Burke asked. "I have, Sergeant." "Might I ask your thoughts on it?" "I personally think it's risky, but not without its rewards." "So you back my plan?" "I'm leaning that way. We have to do something to respond forcefully, especially after the botched response to the gun runners." "I agree, Captain. I do appreciate your support." "You might want to hold your thanks until we can get the general on board." Before they could continue, the screen at the head of the table began flickering away from the blue "Please stand by" screen. The static soon cleared, revealing a conference room in Seattle. At the head of the table sat General Stevens, and flanking him were Corporal Gadd and Clint. "Good morning, Captain Page, Sergeant Burke." "Thank you for joining us so early in the morning," Clint said. "It's only early if you sleep, Clint," Paige replied. Clint let out a chuckle, nodding in agreement. That is very true, Captain. Very true. Did you receive our intel packet? She asked. Yes, Captain. We've been reviewing it for the last few hours, Corporal Gadd replied. And I'm not sold, Captain, General Stevens said. What are your concerns, General? Civilian casualties, just for starters. Based on the drone surveillance photos of St. Mary's, it appears to be brimming with life. Which is precisely the reason why we need to press on, Paige insisted. General Stevens let out an unconvinced grunt, prompting Clint to speak up on his behalf. Captain, you might want to elaborate on that point a bit more for the General here. Happily, Clint. Gentlemen, we have to face facts. The last few weeks of this conflict have not gone well for us. Our ammunition supply from Boise was either destroyed or stolen by the militia and their allies. The only response they've seen from us was the ill-fated mission to Rosalia, where we did more damage than good. They perceive us as weak. With all due respect, Captain, we are weak. Our ammunition supply is dire, to put it mildly, Corporal Gadd added. And with all due respect, Corporal, they don't know that. Based on their movements over the last week, I think we can assume they at least suspect that we're weak, Clint said. Which is why it is vital for this mission to move forward. We hit them hard and fast, while liberating a group of civilians and bringing them into the safety of Seattle. It kills two birds with one stone. General Stevens still wasn't convinced, shaking his head as he thumbed through the intel. He sat up straight as something on the page caught his eye. Am I reading this right about the ammunition? He asked. Yes, sir. Undertaking this mission will likely deplete 75% of our remaining ammunition, Paige confirmed. And how much would that leave you? About 500 rounds, sir. 500 rounds, in all of Spokane. Doesn't that seem a little light, Captain? Especially if the militia decides to retaliate for this little stunt. With all due respect, General, we're not holding off a major offensive with 2,000 rounds, especially if they hit us on multiple fronts. However, if we can show strength, take one of their strongholds, it might make them think twice before striking us. General Stevens studied the intel for another few moments before sitting up and looking straight into the camera. Captain, you make some great points, however. If you aren't able to secure that town without civilian casualties, I'm afraid this could provoke the militia to strike back hard. And as you said, you aren't holding them off with the ammunition you have. It's too big of a risk. I'm sorry. Captain Paige struggled to hold back her disappointment. Before she could respond, Sergeant Burke spoke up. General, what if I could offer up another target? I'm listening, soldier. Burke glanced over to Paige, mouthing the word sorry to her, receiving a subtle nod of approval in response. My scout was out overnight, doing more recon of the area, and came across what we believe to be the militia stronghold. The stronghold isn't in the town of St. Mary's? General Stevens asked. It does not appear to be, sir. This compound appears to predate the apocalypse, so it was most likely the personal property of the militia. And that's where they're staying? Not all of them, sir, as they are protecting the town. However, based on the intel I have, a significant number of them are stationed there. What about civilians? None that we have seen, sir. What are you proposing? We strike in two waves. Bomb the compound with the handful of mortars we have on hand before a small squad moves in to mop up. Then we descend on the town in overwhelming numbers shortly after. While there are a few miles separating the town and the compound, it's close enough that an explosion will carry. It should be enough to convince the militia in town to lay down their arms. And if it isn't? Then they will be dealt with accordingly, sir. General Stevens went back to studying the intel, looking through the paperwork before ultimately nodding his head. Okay, Captain, we are going with Plan B. How soon can you have this operation underway? We will strike at them tonight, sir. The snow has been falling for a couple of days, and it appears as though more is on the horizon. With any luck, the moonlight will be minimal. Very good then. Good luck to you both, and I want a status update as soon as you have it. Yes, sir. Captain, let's circle back at noon. I have a few unrelated issues we need to discuss, Clint added. I'll see you at noon, Clint. The others on the screen gave a nod before it went dark. Captain Page then turned her head over to Sergeant Burke, giving him a stern look. Were you trying to make me look bad on purpose, Sergeant? Or was that just a coincidence? My apologies, Captain. You have my word that I was not holding out on you. I wasn't lying when I said my scout fed me the intel from overnight. It's okay, soldier, we got the thumbs up on it. However, you are convinced it is strictly a military target, correct? Yes, Captain, I am. He had eyes on it for a solid hour and only saw militia. Okay, what do you need from me? I have my team picked out and ready to move on the compound. Would you mind delegating the responsibility for the town? Of course, Sergeant. Don't worry about that. Just focus on the fight that you and your men are facing. I have a platoon leader who has been begging for something more exciting than guard duty. I think this will be right up his alley. If you want to have them meet up with me in a few hours, I can let him know the timing of our attack. We need the element of surprise if this is going to be successful, and that's not going to happen if they show up to St. Mary's ahead of schedule. Don't worry, Sergeant. He's a solid leader. I wouldn't be sending him if he wasn't. I trust you, Captain. And I trust you, Burke. Now go make these people pay for what they've done to our brothers and sisters in arms. Chapter 2. The sun settled behind the horizon, covering the tree-filled landscape in shadow. Sergeant Burke and his second-in-command, Corporal Fletcher, breathed a sigh of relief as the darkness fell around them. They were in an entrenched position a quarter-mile away from the militia compound, and now that the sunlight was gone for the day, the odds of them being discovered fell. With the operation ready to kick off, Fletcher reached into his bag, pulling out a pair of night vision binoculars and handing them over to Burke. So how long do you want to wait? Fletcher asked. Not long, Burke replied. They're probably breathing easy now that another day is behind them, maybe even thinking about what's for dinner. The last thing I want to do is give them a chance to regroup. Sounds like a plan, Sarge. The men are all in position, so you just let me know when you want to kick it off. Burke nodded before looking through the binoculars, hitting a few buttons to activate the night vision and get it dialed in. He gave Fletcher a light tap on the chest to get his attention, speaking as he looked. I got one hostile in the guard tower on the northwest corner. Fletcher clicked on the communicator in his ear, speaking softly. Sniper 1, target in the tower in the northwest corner. Target acquired, came the response from Sniper 1. Stand by, Fletcher said. Burke continued looking around the compound through the chain-link fence that protected the western flank. He could see some movement on the other side of the buildings, but they vanished before he could get a good look at them. He continued scanning, focusing on the tower at the southern entrance. He watched as someone climbed up it. Second sniper target, southeastern tower, Sniper 1 said. He's on the move and will be in position soon. Sniper 2, your target is taking his time. Southeastern tower, Fletcher instructed. I'm tracking him, Sniper 2 confirmed. I'll be ready for the order. Snipers are waiting for the signal. Where do you want the mortars targeting? Fletcher asked Burke. Burke continued scanning the area, focusing his attention on the biggest buildings at the north and south of the compound. He contemplated for a moment, clicking on his own communicator before responding. Okay, men, here's the deal. When I give the signal, I want my snipers to take down their targets, then pick off anything that's moving that isn't us. At the same time, I want Mortar Team 1 firing one off towards the big building to the north. Mortar Team 2, take down the building to the south. As soon as those are flying, I want Mortar Team 1 to readjust and take down the fence in the middle, then join us in the assault. Mortar Team 2, you await my instructions. Are there any questions? The line was silent, save for a single no sergeant coming over it. Good. Now let's get this done. We're moving in 30. Burke clicked off his communicator, handing the binoculars back over to Fletcher and checking his assault rifle. We're going to hit the hole hard, get into the building to the right, and take down anybody that's inside, Burke said. "I'm right behind you, Sarge. We got this," Fletcher replied, extending a fist for a bump. Burke reciprocated before clicking his communicator on again. "It's go time, boys. Let's hit them. On my mark, 3, 2, 1, go." Burke and Fletcher looked through the darkness towards the towers as the silenced thunk of sniper rounds popped off from their sides. While it was difficult to see, they were able to spot the figures at the top of the towers dropping out of sight. A split second later, the thunking sound of mortars being fired off filled the air. Seconds later, the darkness was replaced by gigantic fireballs on either side of the compound. The two soldiers were close enough to feel the heat coming off of the explosions. "Wait for it," Burke said. Another metallic thunk could be heard from their left, signaling another mortar being launched. A second later, Burke smacked Fletcher on the chest and leapt up from their hiding spot. "Let's move." Both men barely cleared their cover when the explosive landed just shy of the compound fence. The detonation ripped the chain-link fence posts right out of the ground, clearing an opening for them. The two soldiers raced forward, their assault rifles in the attack position, just waiting for someone to cross their paths. As they got within 50 yards of the fence, Burke spotted one militiaman coming out from the building on the left. The sergeant didn't hesitate to squeeze the trigger, sending a trio of bullets downrange towards the man, landing center mass and dropping him to the ground. While the silencer muffled the shots a little, the gunshots still resonated through the air. They continued racing up, keeping their focus trained on the area just on the other side of the makeshift entrance. There was an alleyway between the two buildings on either side, and they could see people racing about, but none of them were taking the time to look in their direction. Burke jumped over the wreckage of the fence, with Fletcher close behind. The two of them took cover behind the building on the right, but didn't stop for very long. The sergeant let his rifle drop to his side, pulling out his handgun and knife as he moved up to the back door. While he prepared to breach the building, Fletcher kept a watch on their rear flank. Burke opened his mouth to speak but hesitated when the corporal popped off several rounds. The sergeant adjusted his view, watching the bullet tear through the sides of two militiamen who were racing towards the fence. Fletcher gave a slight nod that he was good to go. Sergeant Burke turned his attention to the door, reaching out with his knife hand and keeping his handgun at the ready. Just as his fingertips touched the knob, it turned on its own and pulled away from his grasp. Burke reacted on instinct, rushing forward while pulling the trigger on his handgun several times. His shoulder planted firmly in the chest of a militiaman, while the bullets from his sidearm punctured the gut of the man. The sergeant got a few steps inside the small building before the militiaman dropped to the ground, pulling him down in the process. Burke struggled to break free, looking up and seeing 3 more militiamen grabbing their gear off the wall. They turned and made eye contact with the sergeant, everyone moving as fast as they could to raise their weapons. Before anybody could, several 3-round bursts popped off from the door. The bullets slammed into the trio of militiamen, causing violent convulsions as they tore through their bodies. As quickly as the gunfire began, it was over, leaving the 3 men on the ground bleeding out. "Are you good, Sarge?" Fletcher called. Burke scrambled to his feet, aiming his handgun at the 3 men on the ground. He surveyed them as they got closer, looking for movement, firing one shot into the head of a militiaman as he struggled to lift his weapon. "Yeah, I'm good, Fletcher," Burke said. Fletcher turned and secured the door to the building as Burke moved to the front. He barely reached the window before more gunshots erupted from outside, causing him to take cover. It took a moment for him to realize they weren't aimed at him. Burke scurried up to the window, taking a knee beside it as he readied his assault rifle. Looking out across the way, he saw a group of 3 militiamen firing from a position right outside of a building, as if they were defending it. Their fire was concentrated towards the alleyway between the building they were in and the neighboring one. It took a moment of them listening carefully, but they could hear the gunfire coming from just outside their walls too. "Sounds like they're giving them hell," Fletcher said as he rushed up to the window, taking a position on the other side. The two of them looked out at the scene, focusing their attention on the trio of men across the open space from them. One of the militiamen fought with one arm, hip-firing a rifle while his other one was in a sling. Despite being 30 yards away, the duo could hear him yelling obscenities towards their squad mates. "He seems like a lively one," Fletcher said. "I don't think we should get too close to him," Burke replied. Burke clicked on his communicator as he motioned for the binoculars from Fletcher. "Mortar team, do you copy?" "We're here, Sarge." "Your target is approximately 40 yards east of the fence you just blew the shit out of." "Stand by," came the response. "Fire when ready," Burke ordered. Fletcher popped in a fresh magazine into his rifle before looking over to Burke. "If you want to send the others to the north, I think we can handle them," Fletcher suggested. "Squeeze off a few rounds if you like," Burke replied. Fletcher nodded as he broke out the window and began firing off towards the trio across the way. One of his shots slammed into the leg of one of the militiamen, sending him to the ground, screaming in pain. "Got one," Fletcher called. Burke nodded as he clicked on his communicator. "Fire team, move to the north and take cover. There's about to be fire in the hole." "Copy that, Sarge," came the response from the fire team. Fletcher fired off a couple more shots before stopping and staring in amazement. "Everything okay, Fletcher?" Burke asked. "Yeah, check out old one arm out there," Fletcher said. Burke looked through his binoculars towards the wounded man across the way, still hip-firing his rifle, while moving towards the man on the ground. He ripped his arm out of his sling, letting out a primal scream in the process while reaching down for the man. He managed to get him up to his good leg, continuing to fire wildly in their general direction as they retreated towards the building. Burke continued to watch, letting out a chuckle, admiring the guts of the man. His joviality faded quickly when he saw a woman running out from the building to help with the wounded. As she exited the building, he noticed a couple of children standing inside, looking out dazed at the battle. "God damn it, what are civilians doing here?" Burke exclaimed. "There aren't supposed to be any," Fletcher replied. Burke scrambled for his communicator, moving to click it on to speak. However, just before he could, a voice came over. "Incoming," the mortar team said. Burke's face went white as he looked out the window, watching helplessly as the woman helped the wounded back into the building. As she shut the door, it exploded in a brilliant flash of flame. Burke collapsed to the ground, a sickening feeling in his gut. His first instinct was to vomit, but he held it together. "You told me there weren't civilians here," Burke said, his voice breaking. "I didn't see any when scouting it out," Fletcher stammered. Burke raised his voice, letting out a pained yell as he pointed an accusing finger towards Fletcher. "You told me there weren't civilians here." "I'm sorry, Sarge. I swear, I didn't see any," Fletcher insisted. More gunfire popped off in the distance, snapping Burke back into the moment. He moved back over to the window, watching a couple of militiamen slowly moving out of the still-standing building across the way. Through gritted teeth, he raised his rifle, aiming it through the broken-out window. "I'm going to rip you a new one later, Corporal. But right now we have to finish this. And may God have mercy on us for what we just did." Chapter 3. A little bit earlier, a few miles to the south of the compound in St. Mary's, Tatum stood in the corner of the large warehouse space, looking out over it and the hive of activity. A couple dozen civilians were busy building makeshift cots and privacy barriers between them. While they weren't spectacular, often just plumbing pipes with sheets draped over them, the people they were building them for excited. For over 2 months, these people had survived against all odds, fighting off flesh-eating ghouls, living in cars, and generally being crowded together ever since they got to town. By the end of the night, however, they were going to have their own private space, at least that was the plan. As Tatum stood and watched proudly, 2 of his militiamen walked towards him. Eric and Reed both wore big smiles on their faces, as if they were up to something. "The last time you guys had a look like that, I lost a day to a drunken blackout," Tatum said. "Come on now. Can't a couple of your closest friends do something nice for you without you accusing us of being up to no good?" Eric replied. Tatum shook his head slightly, giving them a knowing look. "Have you met you guys?" "Yeah, I think that's fair. Still, come on, we got something to show you," Reed added. Tatum nodded and followed as the 3 of them headed toward the back of the building. As he walked, Tatum made eye contact with several civilians, all of whom greeted him with a smile and a nod. They knew what the militia had done for them, and they were eternally grateful. The trio reached the back door of the building, Eric and Reed stopping and turning towards their leader. "We're going to need you to close your eyes," Eric said. "Okay, I'm going to trust you. Don't make me regret it," Tatum said. "Just close your eyes and come on," Reed urged. Tatum reluctantly shut his eyes, reaching out to the others who guided him through the back exit of the building. They walked for a good 20 yards before Tatum began feeling an unexpected warmth on his skin. "What the hell is that?" Tatum asked. "Open your eyes and see for yourself," Reed said. Tatum hesitated before opening one eye, quickly opening the other one with confused excitement. Sitting before him was a brick fire pit with a collection of nice patio chairs surrounding it. The other two members of his militia group, Edgar and Devin, were kicked back, enjoying the glow of the fire with a cold beer. "What in the world is all this?" Tatum asked. "Well, boss, you've been spending a lot of time here in town helping to get people situated and feeling more comfortable," Devin said. "A couple of the civilians took notice and wanted to do something to thank you for all your hard work," Edgar added. "Lucky for you, they used to build outdoor spaces like this for a living," Eric said. "So you have your very own fire pit down here so you have a spot to unwind after a long day of looking after folks," Reed said. Tatum stared into the fire for a moment, letting it warm him up before taking a step closer. His hands were only up for a moment before Eric tossed a beer to him. "Kick back and enjoy, boss. You deserve it," Eric said. Tatum finally began to soften, a smile creeping onto his face as he cracked open the beer and raised it in a toast. "I really appreciate you guys and everything you do." "Likewise, boss," Devin replied. The men held their beers high, however, before they could enjoy them. The faint sound of an explosion reached their ears. All of them tensed up, knowing that something was wrong. "What in the hell was that?" Eric asked. "It sounded like an explosion," Reed said. "From where, though?" Edgar added. The men continued listening intently, looking in every direction to try and get a read on the source. A few moments later, a second explosion detonated in the distance, causing a slight illumination to the north. "It's the compound," Tatum said. Those three words sent chills down every man's spine, freezing them in place for a brief moment. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, they dropped their drinks and leapt to their feet. "Back to the vehicles. Let's move," Tatum ordered. All 5 men ran hard around the building towards their vehicles parked just down the street. As they approached, they spotted the gun store owner Mac running towards them, waving his hands frantically to get their attention. "Did you hear that explosion too?" Tatum called out. "What? I don't know, maybe. But that's not important right now," Mac replied. "It sounded like it was coming from the compound. We have to get up there," Reed said. "That's going to be a hell of a hike," Mac warned. "What the hell are you talking about, Mac?" Devin asked. "The military is here, and they got the roads blocked," Mac explained. Tatum looked around to the other men, seeing the worry on their faces. "How long do we have?" "My boys at the checkpoints are holding them up, so a few minutes at most," Mac said. "Get as much gear as you can carry comfortably. We need food, water, and guns," Tatum commanded. "I got you boys taken care of," Mac said. Mac waved for them to follow him back towards the gun shop, talking along the way. "I figured it would only be a matter of time before those military assholes paid us a visit, so I wanted to be prepared. I made up some care packages just in case." Mac led them into the gun store, making a beeline to the back storeroom. He threw open the door and clicked on the light, pointing to a row of backpacks lined up against the wall with a variety of weapons leaning up against them. "There's 3 days of supplies in there, double the normal ammunition loadout, and some of the best rifles I have," Mac said. "Thanks, Mac," Tatum said. "You better get a move on," Mac replied. "What's the best way out of here?" Reed asked. "There's an old ATV trail just on the other side of the old hardware store. I wouldn't recommend staying on it long, but it should get you far enough out of town that you should be able to slip through their lines, assuming they have any," Mac explained. "Let's hope this is just a show of force, which is why they're coming in on the main roads," Reed said. I doubt we're that lucky, but I'd love to be proved wrong. Come on, we gotta move, Tatum said. All 5 men threw on their backpacks before checking their respective weapons. Once they were situated, Tatum led them out of the gun store, moving with haste as Mac watched helplessly from the door. The militiamen moved quickly through the town, reaching the old hardware store and spotting the ATV trail. They didn't break stride as they reached it, desperate to put as much distance between themselves and the military as possible. The next several minutes were tense as all 5 men kept their heads on a swivel, looking for any signs of threats on the trail. Luck was on their side, however, as they managed to get half a mile outside of town, deep into the woods and off the trail without incident. Tatum brought them to a halt after another 100 yards, motioning for them to form a perimeter and keep watch. The rest of the men did as instructed, catching their breath in the night air. As they did, the faint sounds of gunshots echoed in the distance. "What the hell is going on up there?" Devin asked. "Whatever it is, our boys are up to the task. They'll hold them off," Edgar said. "Let's keep moving," Tatum ordered. The rest of the men gave their leader a firm nod before they continued running through the darkened, snow-covered forest. There was just enough moonlight to allow them to forge their path through the trees, but it was slow going. Tatum continued leading the charge, doing his best to put his fear to the side as they went. While there was very little in his life that terrified him, the lack of gunshots coming from the compound was certainly one of them. Nearly an hour passed before the men were close to the compound, and it had been nearly as long since they heard any sort of gunfire or explosions coming from it. Tatum brought them up to the edge of the tree line, stopping so that they could survey the situation before running headlong into it. Despite his best effort, Tatum fell to his knees when he saw the destruction. "Jesus Christ," Edgar whispered. 3 of the buildings in the compound were leveled, a faint light coming from them as the fires continued to burn. While there wasn't much illumination on the grounds, the men could see several bodies laying motionless on the ground. "We're going in through the front. If it's not one of ours, put them down with extreme prejudice," Tatum said. The rest of the men gave him a subtle nod before following him out from cover. They moved with haste, despite having weary legs from their journey. The 5 of them reached the front gate, which was wide open, pushing through into the interior of the compound. Despite the flames beginning to subside, they could feel warmth coming from them. Once they realized that no military was there, Tatum began calling out, "Is anyone here?" The men listened carefully for any response, hearing a faint sound coming from one of the destroyed buildings. "Over here," Edgar called. They raced over to the building, spotting a badly burned man on the ground a few yards away from the devastation. Despite his injuries, he was clinging to life, lifting up his lone good arm as the other one was caught up in a melted sling. "Frank, oh my God," Reed cried out. Reed raced over to his brother, dropping to his knees, his voice shaking as he spoke. "You're going to be okay, man. You're going to be okay." Tatum's eyes got wide when he realized what building they were standing outside of. He quickly dropped to his knees and was practically yelling at his injured comrade. "Where's Maggie? Where's Dylan?" Frank cleared his throat, struggling to speak. They were inside when it got hit by something. Tatum began sobbing uncontrollably, struggling to form coherent words as the grief hit him hard. Eric took a knee beside Reed, putting his hand on his friend's shoulder to comfort him. "What happened, Frank?" Eric asked. "The military, they hit us hard. We were fighting them off, then. Everything went white and I was blown out the window," Frank explained, struggling to continue as the life slowly left his body. "I'm sorry. I tried to protect them." Reed put his hand gently on his brother's chest, doing his best to not let tears form. "You did good, brother. You did good. You get some rest, okay?" Frank let out a slight sigh as he expended the rest of his energy to grab onto his brother's hand. The 2 of them sat there for a moment, Reed not wanting to leave his side until he was gone. Devin looked over to Tatum, who was staring into the flaming pile of rubble. Like a switch being thrown, he could see their leader's grief turning to righteous anger. "Are you okay, boss?" Devin asked. Tatum fought with his emotions for a moment, getting them under control before speaking. "We can't stay here. We have to get moving." And go where? Devin asked. I got a safe house a couple miles from here. Nice and remote, undetectable unless you know exactly what you're looking for, Edgar said. It'll have to do. Let's move out, Tatum said. Tatum pointed to Edgar, motioning for him to lead the way, which he immediately began doing, not wanting to do anything to upset their leader. Meanwhile, Eric patted Reed on the shoulder in an attempt to get him moving. It took the grieving man a moment to leave his brother, but finally he broke away. Rest easy, brother. Rest easy, Reed said quietly. Reed, Eric, and Devin walked shoulder to shoulder a few yards behind Tatum and Edgar, giving them a little bit of space. Are you okay, Reed? Eric asked. Not really, and probably won't be for a long time. But I'm doing better than he is, Reed replied, nodding towards Tatum, who continued walking with purpose through the compound. Losing a wife and kid like that. I can't imagine what he's going through, Devin said. If I know him, it's a fraction of what the man who did this is going to go through once we get our hands on them. Chapter 4. Edgar led the group through the darkened woods, trudging through untamed wilderness with no path. Despite walking for a solid hour, nobody had said a word since leaving their decimated compound. Everyone struggled to keep their emotions in check, and talking would only make it all the more difficult. Another half-mile of walking later, Edgar stopped the group, looking around to get his bearings and finally breaking the silence. It should be just over here, Edgar said. Well, Edgar, you got me convinced nobody is going to be able to find this place, Devin replied. I'm not even convinced you know where it is. Keep your shorts on, I know where I'm at, Edgar responded. Edgar walked over to a large fallen tree branch, motioning for Devin to give him a hand. The two of them lifted the heavy chunk of wood a few feet to the side, revealing a door lying flat on the ground. I told you I knew where I was going, Edgar said. I guess I shouldn't doubt you then, Devin conceded. Damn straight you shouldn't. Come on, let's get out of the cold, Edgar said. Edgar reached down and yanked open the door, revealing a small wooden set of stairs that descended into a metal-framed box. He clicked on a light, revealing just how small the room was. In the corner was a cot with a hunting rifle hanging over top. At the foot of the bed sat a cooler, which touched the other wall. Stretching out from the bed was a wooden table, with maps, a handful of books, and a ham radio. Directly across from it sat an electric heater, which Edgar clicked on. Don't worry, this thing pumps out the heat. We'll be nice and toasty in just a few minutes, Edgar assured them. Tatum was the last man inside, pulling the door shut behind him. He was forced to take a seat on the stairs as the other four men took up the majority of the space in the enclosed room. Man, how in the hell do you have power down here? Eric asked. Wait, back up a second. How in the hell do you even have this place? It took me the better part of 6 months to build this place, Edgar said. Dug it out by hand mostly and dropped a shipping container in here. A shipping container? Out here with no roads or pathways? Devin asked, incredulous. I didn't say it was easy, Edgar replied. Had to break that bitch up into a few dozen pieces and drive it out here on an ATV and weld it back together again. You know it's bad when the easiest part was running the wires for the radio and solar panels up to the tops of those trees out there. I gotta say, Edgar, I'm impressed, Devin admitted. Well, what can I say? Extreme paranoia about what's coming next is one hell of a motivator, Edgar said. The three of them fell silent as they looked over to Reed and Tatum, both of whom were grieving the family they lost at the compound. All of them knew the banter wasn't helping any, so they silently decided to cut it out. We should be safe here for a while, Edgar said. I have a week's worth of food for 2 people stashed away, so we can regroup and use this as a base of operations for a while. What do we even do after that? Reed asked, his voice strained. They cut our boys down like they were nothing. I'm not above waging a guerrilla war against them, Eric said. We certainly don't have the numbers, but we can make their occupation hurt. I'm not sure I'm a fan of that, Eric, Reed said. Why not? Eric questioned. Because it will endanger the civilians back in town, Reed answered. But we need to strike back at them. Eric insisted. I'm aware, and I agree, Reed replied. But you saw what they did in Rosalia to the people there. The fact is, we don't know what they're capable of. Eric thought about it for a moment before dropping his head and nodding in agreement. So where do we hit them? Eric asked. Spokane, Tatum said. The room fell silent as everyone turned their heads to Tatum, who sat on the stairs with his arms resting on his knees. His gaze was straight ahead, focused like none of them had seen before. That's a bold move, Devin said. I'm not sure the 5 of us are going to be able to put much of a dent in their defenses, but I'm down to try. Edgar, do you have the frequency for Bend? Tatum asked. Edgar looked over to his radio, flipping through a notebook sitting just beside it. A few moments later, he excitedly smacked his hand down on a page. Yep, got it right here, Edgar confirmed. Good. Dial them up for me, would you? Tatum said. Edgar nodded and did as instructed, powering on the ham radio and tuning it to the correct frequency. While he worked on that, Tatum pushed his way through the others, taking a seat in front of the microphone. Okay, you're good to go, Edgar said. Tatum nodded and took another moment to compose himself before speaking. He gripped the microphone tightly, clicking onto the button and speaking forcefully. Come in, Bend. This is Tatum of the St. Mary's Militia, Tatum said. There was a long pause filled with static as every man in the room hoped and prayed the military didn't hit them as well. They exhaled a sigh of relief when a voice came back over the speaker. This is Bend. What can I do for you, Tatum? I need to speak with Maxwell about an urgent matter, Tatum said. We were just struck hard by the military, presumably from Spokane. We have significant casualties, and the military is in control of the civilian population. Understood. Please stand by, the voice replied. Tatum released his grip on the microphone, the room remaining completely silent as they waited for someone to come back at them. Several minutes passed before the leader of the militia's voice greeted them. Tatum, are you still with me? Maxwell asked. I'm here, Maxwell, and I have Eric, Edgar, Devin, and Reed with me as well. We're the only ones who remain, Tatum said. What happened? Maxwell inquired. I don't know exactly, only that they struck our compound without mercy, striking down everyone within its walls, Tatum explained. Your wife and child? Maxwell asked gently. Tatum choked up for a moment before powering through. They were at the compound, along with several other families, he said. The building they were in was leveled. I don't know if they knew what they hit or not, but I don't really care. I aimed to exact my vengeance on them, and I wanted you to be aware of what was coming. You've been very generous to our community over all these weeks, and I felt like I owed you a heads up before striking back since there might be blowback. I sincerely appreciate the courtesy call, Tatum, Maxwell replied. However, I would like to politely ask you to hold off on striking back for the moment. With all due respect, Maxwell, they murdered my family and Reed's brother. We're going to make them pay, Tatum said. I understand, and I'm not asking you to hold off for long, Maxwell said. In fact, I'm only asking you to give me 5 hours. I'd like to send you a care package, and if you're open to it, a plan. We're listening, Tatum replied. There's an airstrip not too far from you, just outside the town of Toccoa. Are you familiar with it? Maxwell asked. We are. We spent a little time there fighting with some of Uncle Sam's finest, Tatum said. Good. I'm sending a team there to secure the airfield, and my care package will be arriving shortly thereafter, Maxwell said. And the plan? Tatum asked. My man will have the details, but the objective is to take down the military and secure the city of Spokane for ourselves, Maxwell explained. Tatum looked around the room to his men, seeing the confusion and worry on their faces. While I do appreciate your confidence in us, Maxwell, I think you're overestimating our operational capacity, Tatum said. Unless you're sending us an army, I'm not sure we're going to be able to pull that one off. I wish I could send you an army, Maxwell said. However, I will be sending along a way for you to secure your own army. That would be a neat trick, Tatum said. And one that is very achievable, Maxwell continued. In the north of the city, the military runs a prison camp. There are some genuinely bad people locked up in there, but for the most part they're made up of deserters and people who didn't believe in the military's mission. In short, people who would be very sympathetic to our cause and who would be more than happy to pick up arms to strike down their oppressors. All they need is someone to let them out of their cages and be pointed in the right direction. That sounds like something we can do, Tatum said. Very good then. Please make your way to the Toccoa airstrip and await my man's arrival, Maxwell instructed. Thank you, Maxwell. We really do appreciate your help, Tatum said. Please, Tatum. The appreciation is completely on my end, Maxwell replied. We have been dealing with multiple encounters with the military over the last few weeks, and my hope is that this action will make them think twice about challenging us again. My only regret is that we were not able to execute this plan before your friends and loved ones paid the ultimate price. You have my word that we'll get this job done, Tatum assured him. I have no doubt that you will. Safe travels, my friend, Maxwell said. As the line went dead, all the men in the bunker stared into the void, unsure of what to say. It took a few moments for Edgar to break the silence. Jesus Christ, I need a drink after that, Edgar said. He walked over to the cooler by the bed, opening it up and pulling out a bottle of mystery liquid. Before anybody could dissuade him from drinking, he had the top off and the bottle turned up, consuming half of it before replacing the top and putting it back in the cooler. Are you good there, Edgar? Eric asked. No, I'm not, Edgar admitted. This shit is way above my pay grade. You'll be all right, Eric said. Somehow I doubt that, Edgar replied. Man, it's one thing to fight for survival against those things or the occasional skirmish so we can ride the apocalypse out. But going up against the military in a heads-up fight on their turf, I'm not cut out for that. Don't you care that they hit us? Killed our friends? Killed my brother? Killed Tatum's wife and child? Reed asked, his voice rising in anger. Of course I do. But running into a hail of bullets isn't going to bring them back, Edgar said. Because I don't care what Maxwell says. This sounds like a one-way trip for a lot of us. And let's be realistic. It's definitely a one-way trip for me. I can't believe you, Edgar. Just when we need you most, you're. Tatum deafened the bunker with a two-finger whistle, getting everyone to stop talking and protect their ears. Edgar's right. This is above his pay grade, Tatum said. We're all ex-military and know what we're getting into. Besides, I have another mission for his survivalist skill set, Tatum added. Reed looked at Tatum angrily, but lightened up when Tatum gave him a knowing nod. What can I do, boss? Edgar asked. I need you to watch over the civilians in town, Tatum said. Coordinate with Mac to make sure they have everything they need. And if the military starts taking out their frustrations on what we're about to do to them on the civilians, it's your job to get them someplace safe. You know I will, Edgar said. Tatum stepped up to Edgar, extending a hand. Rather than shake it, Edgar stepped up and embraced Tatum tightly. You make these sons of bitches pay for what they did, Edgar said. We will, Edgar, we will, Tatum assured him. Edgar finally let go of Tatum, taking a step back and nodding to the other men, who responded in kind. We have to get moving if we're going to make it to Toccoa, Tatum said. The others nodded and began following Tatum out of the bunker. Reed lingered behind, giving Edgar a look. You do right by us and take care of those people, Reed said. I will, and I'll make sure your brother gets a proper burial, Edgar replied. Reed got a little choked up at the sentiment before collecting himself. He didn't speak, only giving Edgar an appreciative nod before turning and joining the others. Edgar walked over to the stairs, standing at the bottom and looking up to his friends. Good luck, boys. Give them hell, Edgar said. We will. Edgar. Good luck, Tatum replied. Edgar fought back his emotions as Tatum shut the bunker door above him. Despite trying to force positive thoughts into his head, he couldn't help thinking that this might be the last time he saw any of them alive. Chapter 5. Day 0 plus 67. 2:37 a.m. Tatum sat behind the wheel of an older model sedan, that they had managed to jump-start at a nearby farm. The car inched up the road towards the airstrip, just a mile or so ahead. The other 3 men shivered as the heater struggled to pump out enough warmth to keep the interior comfortable. "I can see why the farmers left this hunk of junk behind," Devin said. Reed shook his head. "It's better than being outside in the cold." "Not by much," Devin muttered. "Yeah, well, it saved our legs from having to walk the last few miles," Reed pointed out. Devin sighed. "Fine, I'll give you that." Without warning, Tatum hit the window controls, rolling down the window halfway, prompting protests from the back seat. "Come on, man, really?" Eric complained. "Shut up and listen," Tatum snapped. The men did as instructed, listening intently as the faint sounds of gunshots popped off in the distance. "Christ, is the military here too?" Reed asked, his voice tight. "They can't be," Devin said. "Why in the hell would they come to a dead town?" "Get your weapons ready," Tatum ordered, "but do not fire until I give the order." The other men nodded in agreement as they readied their weapons, while Tatum picked up the pace. He made the final turn into the airport, and the gunshots intensified, with a dozen popping off in rapid succession. A moment later, a flashlight clicked on and off rapidly in the distance. "Is that our guy?" Reed asked. Tatum shook his head. "Not unless the plane is ahead of schedule." "What do you want to do?" Reed pressed. Tatum continued staring at the flashlight, which was flickering at different intervals, signaling it was a human doing it. "They appear to be waving us in. Let's just hope they're friendly." Tatum drove across the back parking lot of the airport towards the light. As they got closer, they saw 6 other men step out from the shadows, joining their comrade, who was continuing to click his light. "Well, that's creepy as hell," Reed muttered. All 7 men stood shoulder to shoulder, decked out in blood-soaked combat gear and body armor, holding heavy-duty weaponry in the ready position. Their heads were fully covered by metal masks, painted to look like demons straight from hell. Tatum pulled up within 10 yards of the squad, putting the car in park and looking over to Reed. "If they try anything, put them down. I don't care who they are." "You can count on it," Reed replied. Tatum nodded and opened the door, raising his hands as he stepped outside. None of the 7 moved, as if they weren't threatened at all by his presence. The leader of the group spoke up in a forceful yet calm manner. "Are you Tatum?" the leader asked. "Yep, that's me," Tatum replied. "And who might you be?" "We're none of your concern," the leader said. Tatum raised an eyebrow. "That's a little ominous, especially given the amount of gunfire we heard while driving up." "If it puts your mind at ease, we're on your side," the leader said. "Maxwell has us out here making sure things that need to get done are getting done. Is that good enough for you?" Tatum paused, then nodded. "That's good enough for me." "Excellent. Church will be landing in the next few minutes. If you and your men would like to wait inside for him, you are more than welcome to do so," the leader said. "I appreciate that," Tatum said. "It's my pleasure. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have places to be." The leader didn't wait for a response from Tatum, waving his hand and getting the rest of his team to turn and walk back into the darkness. Tatum didn't respond, rather he just stared at them for a moment until they were out of sight. With a knock on the hood of the car, the others exited, still having their weapons at the ready. "They seemed friendly," Reed said. "They're friends of Maxwell and didn't seem interested in shooting at us. With the way today has gone, that's good enough in my book," Tatum replied. "So what do we do now?" Devin asked. "They said to wait inside here for church, who should be here any minute," Reed said. "I don't know who or what that is, but I am all about not being out in the cold anymore," Eric said. "So let's get inside." "Agreed," Reed said. Tatum led the group towards the door of the large hangar they were parked outside of. "It was hard to hear in the car, but did you ask them what all that gunfire was about?" Devin asked. Tatum stopped in the doorway, staring at the fully illuminated hangar. On the ground were dozens of zombie corpses, all of them missing chunks of their heads. The men stared at the carnage for a moment before Devin spoke up again. "Never mind. The men continued to stare at the carnage for several moments, not sure of what to make of it. Nobody spoke until the sound of an airplane engine could be heard getting closer. "Sounds like our care package is arriving," Tatum said. "Come on, let's go greet them." The men walked through the unburied graveyard that was the hangar, getting to the other side and stopping at the door. They watched as an older cargo plane came in for a soft landing, powering down and stopping just outside of the hangar. A moment later, the side door opened up to reveal a hulking beast of a man. Michael Church stood well over 6 feet, with the build of an aging pro wrestler and a crazed expression that matched his look. Despite the late hour and the long flight, he appeared to be exactly where he wanted to be. "Are you my warriors?" Church shouted. "Oh yeah, you look like my warriors. Are you ready to take the fight to these assholes?" "Yeah, you are. Come on, get in." Tatum looked around to the others, who were just as confused as he was. "You want us to get in?" "Of course I do," Church said. "The prison camp is on the north side of town, so launching an offensive from the south doesn't really make much sense, now does it? Now, come on, we're on a schedule." Tatum looked to his men, who shrugged and nodded as they walked to the plane. Church stepped out of the way so that they could board, pointing to a makeshift row of seats against the side wall. "You can call me Church, and welcome aboard my flying sanctuary," Church said. "I got everything you could possibly want: guns, ammo, explosives, and to a lesser extent, some bottled water and prepackaged snack cakes. I know peanuts are usually customary on flights, but my doctor said I needed to cut back on the salt. And let's be real, the unsalted ones taste like you're chewing on plywood." The men continued to look confused at the fast-talking beast of a man. Rather than engage, they quietly walked over to their seats and got buckled in. "Okay, boys, get comfortable," Church said. "Once we're in the air, I'll be back here to fill you in." Church shuffled off to the front of the plane, and a moment later the engines roared back to life. "Is this guy for real?" Reed asked. "It would appear so," Tatum replied. "5 of us against a military prison camp," Devin said. "This should be fun." Tatum looked towards the back of the plane, spotting a few dozen wooden crates marked up with various words like rifles and explosives. "On the plus side, it looks like we'll have all the firepower we'd ever need," Tatum noted. The men fell quiet as the engine noise overpowered the space, making it difficult to hear. It took several minutes before the plane straightened out and the noise level returned to a manageable level. As if on cue, Church emerged from the front of the plane carrying a handful of snack cakes and bottles of water. "Here you go, boys, just like I promised," Church said. "Enjoy them, because they sure aren't making these anymore." Church passed out the treats before diving into his own with the joy of a 12-year-old being spoiled by his mother. After a few moments of savoring their late-night snacks, Tatum spoke up. "So, Church, what's the plan exactly?" Tatum asked. "Pretty simple, really," Church said. "We're going to roll into the prison camp, liberate a few hundred of our brothers and sisters in arms, then lay waste to the military." Church spoke matter-of-factly, as if what they were doing was as simple as crossing the street. He smiled as he shoved the last half of his snack cake into his mouth. "Okay, I like the plan, except there's only 5 of us. 6 if we're including the pilot," Tatum pointed out. "Oh no, old Zeke up there is a lover, not a fighter," Church said. "Plus he's so old I'm pretty sure he'd break a hip just lifting a gun." "So 5 then," Tatum said. "Relax, Tatum. It's all going to work out," Church assured him. "Now come on. We only have about half an hour before we land in Deer Park, and I want to show you boys what kind of goodies I brought for you." Church smiled as he strolled towards the back of the cargo plane, waving for the men to follow. Reluctantly, they did as requested, spending the next half hour looking over the collection of weapons, which was significant. The men kept their mouths shut as Church went into great detail about everything they had, rambling on like a hyperactive kid. While the weaponry was impressive, Tatum and the others couldn't get over the lack of manpower, but kept those thoughts to themselves. After what seemed like an eternity, Zeke's voice came over the speaker. "We're coming in for a landing, so you boys may want to take your seats," Zeke announced. Church's face lit up, knowing that playtime was almost upon them. He ran to the front of the cockpit, leaving the militiamen to fend for themselves. Despite their obvious concerns, nobody spoke until they were on the ground and rolling to a stop. "Do you think it's too late to back out of this operation?" Reed asked. "Probably," Tatum replied. "But who knows, it might work out." Church came bouncing out from the cockpit, a giant smile on his face as he ripped into another snack cake, shoving it into his mouth as he walked towards the back of the plane. "If we survive this mission, you're going to have to share your secret on how you remain so damn optimistic, Tatum," Devin said. "I found that disassociation and hard drugs help," Eric added. Devin chuckled as the men walked toward the back of the plane, where Church was opening it up. Smiles began to creep onto their faces as they saw 40 men standing at attention on the runway just behind the plane. Church turned around, letting out a big laugh and pointing to the group. "Man, I had you guys going, didn't I? You really thought it was just going to be the 5 of us." For a minute there, "Yeah, I kind of did," Tatum admitted. "Well, I'm sorry to burst your bubble, but we have some badass help," Church said. "Gentlemen, let me introduce you to the Deer Park chapter of the militia. They're big, strong, and ready to throw down. Isn't that right, boys?" A loud cheer erupted from the crowd of militia on the runway. Tatum nodded his head in excitement, knowing that the mission might actually have a real chance at success now. "So what do you say, Tatum?" Church asked. "Are you ready to get this show on the road? Let's go show the military that they messed with the wrong people." Chapter 6. Tatum, Eric, Reed, and Devin took up a position at the edge of the woods overlooking the prison camp. The main building was a few hundred yards away from them, a giant high school that had been repurposed into a detention center. There was little in the way of defenses, outside of a couple of guard posts along either side of the driveway. They existed solely to prevent any inmates from stealing a car from the lot, not defend the premises from an outside attack. While the military was worried about an offensive from the militia, they never dreamed the prisoners would be a target. At the outer edges of the school grounds sat the men's target, a small auxiliary building filled with a handful of classrooms. Before the apocalypse, it housed several vocational programs, but now it housed the worst of the worst offenders the military had in custody. Tatum peered through binoculars towards their target, scanning each window for movement but seeing little. The sun wasn't coming up for another hour or so, leaving the interior mostly dark. The only exception was the front entryway, which was illuminated, revealing a couple of guards sitting at the front desk. Both men were reading books, not paying any attention at all to their surroundings. "How are we looking, boss?" Reed asked. "I got 2 just inside the door who appear to be bored out of their minds," Tatum replied. "How many more do you think are inside?" Eric asked. "Assuming Church's intel is right, and this is where the troublemakers are housed, it's safe to assume there's going to be more guards," Tatum said. "How do you want to play it?" Devin inquired. "The main force is focused on the school, so it's just us taking this building," Tatum explained. "Reed and I will cover the front entrance. Eric, Devin, I want you to circle around to the back entrance. If we're lucky, the guards will go peacefully and surrender when they realize we have our guns on them." "And if they don't?" Eric asked. "Then I'm counting on you and Devin to make them regret taking a shot at us. We'll hold their attention as long as we can, but try not to wait too long," Tatum replied. "As soon as we hear a shot, we'll be through the door, guns blazing," Devin assured. "Good. Once we secure the building, we need to take up positions overlooking the main school building. We're kicking the offensive off, so once we start firing and pulling attention our way, Church is leading his force in from their rear flank. With any luck, they'll overwhelm them quickly," Tatum said. "What about the prisoners?" Reed asked. "Try to get a room without them. If you can't, just make damn sure they know we're there to get them out. But don't hesitate to put them in their place if the situation warrants it," Tatum instructed. All 3 of the others nodded to Tatum before readying their weapons. "Let's move," Tatum commanded. The men stepped out from cover, positioning themselves so that they wouldn't be visible from the front door of the building as they approached. With a click on his communicator, Tatum spoke. "Church, we're making our move. Stand by for the diversion." "Copy that, good buddy. Have some fun out there and we'll see you soon," Church responded. Tatum didn't reply, simply clicking off his communicator and getting into business mode. He nodded to Eric and Devin as they broke off to circle around the building, leaving him and Reed to cover the front. It took a couple of minutes of walking before they made it to the building, both of them pressing their backs against the wall as they carefully walked toward the front. As they got within 5 yards, they heard the metallic clang of the door opening ahead of them. Tatum raised his rifle, aiming it at head level, anticipating resistance. Much to his relief, one of the guards stepped out, immediately lighting up a cigarette. The man took a deep inhale of the smoke before looking up to the sky and blowing it out. A groan escaped his lips as he stretched his weary muscles. "The entire city is ours for the taking, and we can't get more comfortable chairs for us to sit in," the guard muttered to the darkness, chuckling as he spoke. He took another deep inhale of the cigarette. Tatum glanced over his shoulder to Reed, giving him a nod to let him know he was making his move. Tatum moved as quietly as he could, however. The first step in the crunchy snow drew the attention of the guard, who looked in his direction. Both men froze in the moment, Tatum aiming his rifle directly at the guard's head as the cigarette dangled from his bottom lip. "Well, this is a little awkward, isn't it?" Tatum said. "You could say that," the guard responded. "It might be in your best interest to lay on your stomach and stretch your arms out," Tatum suggested. "And it might be in your best interest to walk back the way you came and find a hole to hide in," the guard retorted. "I tried hiding, but you guys just wouldn't let me be," Tatum said. "Maybe the second time is the charm," the guard offered. "I doubt that. Now get down on your stomach before I put you there," Tatum ordered. The guard pressed his lips together, taking a long drag on his cigarette before forcefully spitting it out. The sudden movement of the bright ember drew Tatum's attention for a fraction of a second, which was all the time the guard needed to dart back into the doorway. Tatum quickly recovered, firing off a couple of shots towards the guard, which drew nothing but air. "Damn it," Tatum muttered. Tatum sprinted towards the door as the guard opened it up and began yelling to his partner. The militiaman ran across the entrance, firing wildly as he crossed over to the other side. A trio of bullets ripped through the front glass of the door, one of which clipped the fleeing guard in the shoulder, sending him down to the ground in pain. Tatum managed to get across to the other side before the other guard opened fire, sending half a magazine's worth of ammunition back at him. Tatum and Reed flanked the door, their backs pressed up against the wall of the building, letting the panicked man inside fire off as many shots as he wanted to before responding. Tatum spoke low, just loud enough for Reed to hear. "When he stops shooting, I'm going to pull his fire and give you the shot to put his ass down," Tatum instructed. Reed nodded and readied himself as the gunfire from inside continued unabated. After a few more seconds, Tatum found his moment, poking his rifle around the corner and firing blindly through the glass. He barely got his weapon back behind cover before more bullets flew at him. Reed pounced, sweeping his rifle around the corner and training it on the gunman inside. The guard never saw his killer as the militiaman put 2 rounds center mass, dropping the man to the ground in a heap. "No," the wounded guard cried out. A bullet slammed into the wall just beside Reed, forcing him back behind cover as the wounded guard on the ground returned fire. He squeezed off a few more rounds towards Reed before Tatum stepped around the corner and opened fire. The guard attempted to adjust his aim, but Tatum was too quick. With 3 squeezes of the trigger, the guard was put down with no mercy. "Clear," Tatum announced. Tatum pushed open the front door, which was missing the majority of its glass. The 2 men moved inside, sweeping the common area for other threats. Before they could make their way to any of the doors, gunfire erupted from the back end of the building. "Cover these doors, I got it," Tatum ordered. Reed nodded and took up position in the corner of the room, giving him visibility over the entire space. Tatum, meanwhile, raced down the hallway, rifle at the ready as the gunfire intensified at the far end of the building. The back half of the building was darkened, but he could see muzzle flashes illuminating the rear hallway, which ran horizontal to the hall he was in. As Tatum approached, he spotted 2 soldiers backing up while firing. "Got you bastards," Tatum muttered. Tatum opened fire, catching the 2 soldiers by surprise. His bullets ripped through the sides of their bodies, leaving them crumpled up on the ground, bleeding out. A couple more shots popped off from the hallway before he heard a familiar voice yelling out. "We're clear," Eric called. "We're clear here too," Tatum confirmed. Eric and Devin soon emerged from the darkened hallway, spotting Tatum and coming over. "That went better than expected," Eric said. Before Tatum could respond, a torrent of gunfire erupted at the school a couple of 100 yards away. "Good to see church isn't waiting around," Devin remarked. "Come on, we need to get into firing position," Tatum ordered. The three of them raced back to the front of the building where Reed continued his watch. "Reed, keep doing what you're doing. We'll handle the defenses," Tatum directed. "I think you might have some help if you want it," Reed replied, nodding towards the door to the corner classroom. In the window were two prisoners staring back at them. Tatum thought about raising his rifle towards them but decided against it. He stepped over to the door as Eric grabbed the keys to the room off the desk. "I'm going to say this to you once," Tatum said, addressing the prisoners. "We're here to help you guys out, but before we can, we have to protect this building from a counteroffensive. And to do that, we're going to need that room. Can you two behave while we do that? If it means we're going to get out of here, then yeah, man, we'll do whatever you want us to do," one of the prisoners replied. "Okay, I'm glad to hear it," Tatum said. "My friend here is going to unlock the door, and I want everybody in there to take a seat along this wall." Yeah, man, we're good. Just let us out of here," the prisoner insisted. Tatum nodded to Eric, who unlocked the door. The prisoners inside quickly listened to their instructions, half a dozen of them filing out in an orderly fashion and taking a seat against the wall. Tatum nodded towards Reed, who stared the prisoners down. "That's my friend Reed. He's not as nice as I am. Be on your best behavior now," Tatum warned. "Yeah, man, we're not going anywhere," the prisoner assured. Tatum gave Reed a thumbs up before he led Eric and Devin into the classroom. They rushed up to the windows, opening them up to give themselves clean firing lines. In the distance, they saw the school under full assault. Muzzle flashes were coming from the building as well as the surrounding darkness. In the open space between the two buildings, they spotted half a dozen soldiers coming towards them. "Okay, boys, stay frosty and let's finish this." Chapter 7. Tatum, Eric, and Devin aimed their rifles into the darkness, watching as the half-dozen soldiers rushed across the field towards them. With each step they took, Tatum hoped that the battle raging behind them would force the group to turn around, but it appeared as though their mission was clear: secure the outbuilding. "When they get within 20 yards of us, we take them down. Eric, focus on the two on the left. Devin, the two on the right. I'll take center," Tatum said. "We fire on your signal," Devin replied. Tatum nodded as all three militiamen aimed their rifles out the open window, honing in on their respective targets. The trio took long, deep breaths to steady themselves as the enemy got within range. "Fire," Tatum ordered. The three men squeezed their triggers at the same moment, sending a single round each downrange. A split second later, screaming and panic fire could be heard from just outside of the building. Most of the military bullets slammed into the building, as if they weren't exactly sure where the shots were coming from. Their extended firing made them easy targets for the well-trained militiamen. The trio adjusted their aim, picking out their other targets before putting a bullet in each of them. They continued holding their firing position, staring out into the darkness to make sure their targets were down. After several moments, they began to relax. "It was nice of them to run straight at us," Eric said. "I can't imagine they have their best and brightest out here on guard duty," Devin added. "That's probably true." "I would think that." Eric started but was interrupted by bullets ripping through the window, narrowly missing him. As he instinctively dove to the ground, Tatum and Devin raised their rifles and opened fire, sending a dozen shots towards the muzzle flashes on the ground. Their bullets found their mark, causing the injured soldier to fall backward, firing his weapon into the air a couple of times before falling silent. Tatum continued aiming towards the soldiers while barking out orders. "Check on Eric," Tatum commanded. Devin broke away from the window, rushing over to his friend who was bleeding on the ground. Jesus, man, are you good? Devin asked. Eric touched his head, feeling blood. He touched his head a few more times before he realized he was missing a chunk from his ear. It just nicked me. I'm going to be fine, but damn, this is going to sting, Eric said. Devin let out a laugh, smacking his friend on the chest as he helped him up off the ground. We're good, Tatum, Devin called out. Tatum held up a finger, getting them to stop talking before putting his hand up to his communicator. Understood, we're on the way, Tatum said. What's going on? Devin asked. Church said there's a group of them pinned down in the northeast stairwell and need help, Tatum replied. Let's move, Devin said. Tatum stepped over to Eric, putting his hand on his shoulder to stop him from moving. Get that ear checked out. We got this. Besides, Reed might need some help, Tatum told him. Eric wanted to fight the issue, but he instead nodded in agreement. If you need backup, just call, Eric said. Tatum nodded and smacked Devin on the chest. Come on, let's move, Tatum said. The two men darted out of the classroom and headed to the front door, confusing Reed. Eric will explain. Watch the prisoners, Tatum instructed. Reed simply nodded and did as instructed, leaving the duo to rush out of the building and race across the open area towards the school. As they ran, they could see the battle intensifying ahead of them. The muzzle flashes coming from the rooftops had tripled since the last time they looked, popping off in multiple directions. Return fire coming from the tree line surrounding the building continued unabated as well. It took a solid minute of running for the duo to reach the school building. Near the southeast corner of the building, they spotted a fire exit door that had been propped open. They paused briefly at the side of the door, making sure they were on the same page before entering. With a subtle nod, they breached, entering a darkened stairwell. While it was quiet in their immediate vicinity, gunshots echoed down the hallway and above them. What do you want to do? Devin asked. We're going up. If Church and his men can get the high ground, they'll be fine, Tatum said. Devin nodded, and the two of them began climbing the stairs, moving as quietly as they could as the battle raged around them. As they approached the second floor, Devin tapped Tatum on the shoulder and pointed to the wall, where a ladder was bolted into the concrete, leading up to a rooftop hatch. What do you think? Thin out their numbers and set the main force free, Devin asked. Tatum nodded and clicked on his communicator. Church, do you copy? Tatum asked. I hope you have some good news for me, because I'm a little claustrophobic. Being locked up in this stairwell isn't doing much for my mental health, Church replied. We're in the southeastern stairwell, Tatum said. Good, if you can get the gentleman on the second floor to stop firing at us. That would be greatly appreciated, Church said. If you can hold out for a few more minutes, I have an idea that might speed this whole thing up, Tatum told him. What are you thinking? Church asked. We got roof access, so I think we can take them down and free up the bulk of your force, Tatum explained. Do it, Church responded. Okay, we're moving, Tatum said. Tatum clicked off his communicator before heading straight for the ladder with Devin close behind. He paused at the top, hearing the gunshots ringing out in the distance. With a deep breath, he poked his head out to get a better look at things. Just ahead of them sat an industrial-sized air conditioning unit, blocking most of his view. He motioned for Devin to follow him up, the two of them taking a defensive position behind the heavy machinery. They surveyed the situation, spotting half a dozen men at the far edge of the rooftop who were intently focused on the forces at the tree line. What do you think? Draw their attention from here or hit and run? Tatum asked. Oh, definitely hit and run. We're a good 50 yards out, and that's a hell of a shot in the dark. If we rush them, they'll never know what hit them, Devin said. Okay then, let's knock them out, Tatum agreed. The two men exchanged a fist bump before emerging from cover. Tatum motioned for Devin to take the right side, while he focused on the left. They moved in unison, walking at a fast pace while keeping their sights on the enemy ahead. Tatum reached his target first, a lone soldier a good 10 yards away from the closest man, firing as fast as he could towards the militia in the trees. Rather than fire, Tatum positioned himself behind the man, rushing forward and delivering a forceful shove. The soldier screamed as he toppled over the edge of the building, plummeting to the ground below. Much to Tatum's relief, the terrified screams weren't loud enough to break through the gunfire of his comrades. Tatum raised his rifle, pointing it at the next two men who were side by side near the corner of the building. He allowed himself a quick glance to his right, seeing Devin moving forward, leaving a corpse in his wake. Tatum turned his attention back to the soldiers at the corner, who were still unaware anything was wrong. When he got within 10 yards, the militiaman planted his feet in the ground and opened fire. At this distance with his assault rifle, it was like a simple version of the carnival shooting game. 2 quick trigger squeezes for each man, 2 bullets in their backs. He kept his aim trained on them as they collapsed to the rooftop, relieved to hear a similar cadence of gunfire going off from Devin's side of the rooftop. "Clear." Devin called out. "We're clear." Tatum responded. Tatum clicked on his communicator, speaking forcefully. "The rooftop is clear. Your men can press forward," Tatum said. "Excellent work, my man. Now, if you still have bullets left in that rifle of yours, would you mind sending a few in the direction of the rowdy bunch on the 2nd floor? I really want to get out of this stairwell," Church requested. "Consider it done," Tatum replied. Tatum nodded to Devin before the two of them raced back towards the ladder. In a matter of moments, they were positioned beside the 2nd floor door, fresh magazines in their rifles and ready for anything. As they stepped out into the open, they saw 3 soldiers set up behind 2 large wooden teachers' desks that they had pulled out into the hallway. They were exchanging gunfire back and forth with people in the doorway, neither side gaining any ground. Devin and Tatum took a position on opposite sides of the hallway, taking a knee against the wall 20 yards away from the trio of soldiers. As they aimed their weapons, one soldier took a knee to reload, catching a glimpse of them out of the corner of his eye. Rather than react forcefully, the soldier dropped his weapon and put his hands up to surrender. With a subtle head nod towards the 2 other soldiers from Tatum, the surrendering man slowly raised his hand up and tapped each of them on the backside, yelling out in the process. Tatum couldn't hear what he said, but the words were enough to get both soldiers to raise their rifles up in the air before putting them down to the side and joining their comrade on their knees. "We surrender. We surrender. Don't shoot," the soldier yelled. Tatum clicked on his communicator as he kept his weapon on the trio of soldiers. "Church, we're clear up here." "They've surrendered," Tatum said. "Excellent news, sir. I will be right up," Church responded. Tatum clicked off the communicator and stared at the 3 soldiers, addressing them. "Just keep your hands where we can see them, and this will all be over soon," Tatum instructed. The soldiers reluctantly nodded, keeping their hands in the air and facing Tatum and Devin. Behind them, the door to the stairwell opened, Church strolling out with a sense of purpose. Without breaking stride, he moved towards the soldiers, casually drawing his handgun. Tatum didn't have a chance to react before Church put a round in the back of one of the soldiers' heads. Church didn't hesitate between shots, adjusting his aim and firing another shot into the side of the next man's head as he turned around. The final soldier spun around, falling to his back and kicking his feet to desperately try and put distance between himself and Church. Hey now, wait a second. I'm a lot of things, but a great shot ain't one of them. One way or another, this is going to happen. But if you keep wiggling around like that, it's going to hurt a whole hell of a lot more than a single shot to the head," Church said. The soldier began to panic, letting out a series of noises that resembled words, but his fear wouldn't allow anything coherent to come out. In a last-ditch attempt to survive, he glanced back to Tatum, who contemplated for a moment before responding with a shrug. The soldier turned around just in time to see Church pulling the trigger, the bullet striking him in the middle of the forehead. His lifeless body convulsed for a moment before falling still. "All right now, Tatum, you're impressing me today. When Maxwell told me about you helping all those civilians, I thought you'd be a bit weak-kneed in situations like this. My apologies for doubting you, sir," Church said. In his gut, Tatum was bothered by what transpired. Executing prisoners went against what he believed in. However, after thoughts of his wife and son popped into his head, any sympathy he might have had vanished. 24 hours ago, I might have called you out. But right now, these assholes get no quarter from me," Tatum replied. Church let out a bit of a chuckle, nodding his head in excitement. Well, it's good to know that you're on board for a little bit of fun today. Let's get all of these political prisoners freed up and down to the gym. I want to tell them what's about to happen. Chapter 8. Tatum and Reed stood beside the door of the gymnasium, watching as the prisoners filed in one after another. To their side, Devin worked on patching up Eric's ear. While it was a superficial wound, the amount of blood that poured out had covered his shirt in crimson. I can see why pro wrestlers would cut themselves here. Makes it look a lot worse than it actually is, Devin said, as he worked. Eric winced a bit as Devin tightened the bandage on his ear, causing the makeshift nurse to laugh. "Don't laugh, it stings," Eric grumbled. Devin continued chuckling to himself as he finished bandaging his friend up. Before stepping away, he gave Eric a playful flick on the ear, causing him to mutter curses under his breath. "You're going to pay for that one," Eric muttered. Devin continued laughing as he walked back over to the others. The foursome scanned the crowd, which was in the several hundreds, mostly men but with a few women peppered within the ranks. This seems like an awful lot of prisoners for such a small community. Were they sending troublemakers from Seattle here? Reed asked. No clue. Let's find out, Tatum replied, reaching out and grabbing the arm of one of the prisoners, gently pulling him in their direction. The prisoner was a little defensive at first, not expecting the tug, but quickly relaxed as Tatum put his hands up apologetically. Sorry about that. Didn't mean to startle you, Tatum said. It's no problem, man. What do you want? The prisoner asked. Just want to know what you did to get put in here, Tatum said. The prisoner began laughing, shaking his head in disbelief at what he was about to say. I had a disagreement with my superior officer. What kind of disagreement? Tatum pressed. Well, he wanted me and my squad to run into a supercenter and clear it out. When I made suggestions about how to do it more carefully, simple stuff like creating a diversion at the back to pull any of those things away from the front, he flew off the handle. Started yelling at me to follow orders and go in through the front door immediately, the prisoner explained. He sounds like a peach, Reed remarked. That's a polite way of putting it. I'd say he was a raging asshole who still thought promotions mattered. He started screaming about how other squads were clearing buildings faster than us, and it was making him look bad as a leader. So he ordered me to lead the team in again, and I said no. He put his hands on me, so I put his ass on the ground. The next thing I know, I'm being led away in cuffs, the prisoner said. What's his name? If we run across him, we'd be more than happy to smack him around a bit for you, Reed offered. The prisoner laughed a bit before continuing. I appreciate the sentiment, gentlemen, but another one of my fellow prisoners took care of that for me. About a week after I got put in here, he was fragged by someone who felt a little more strongly about the rank chasing than I did. It's good to see that no matter how much things change, they stay the same, Reed said with a smirk. Hey, one more question for you, Tatum said. Shoot, the prisoner replied. Have they been moving you guys in from Seattle too? Tatum asked. The prisoner thought for a moment before shaking his head. I don't know everybody in here, but everyone I've talked to is from the Spokane offensive. We'll get a few day trippers who screw up on the line, although we did get some big wig a week or two ago. Oh yeah? What did he do? Reed asked. I don't know exactly. I kind of tuned him out after a while because he wouldn't stop rambling about kicking off the war, the prisoner said. Reed and Tatum exchanged a knowing glance. Did you catch this guy's name? Tatum asked. It was some sergeant. Cortez? No, Carver? Oh, Carter. Sergeant Carter, the prisoner said. Tatum's demeanor turned deadly serious as he stepped up to the prisoner. Where is he? The prisoner could sense the seriousness in Tatum's voice, causing him to turn around and begin scanning the sea of faces. It took him a moment before he spotted him. There he is, a couple rows up on the far right. He's bunking with a few buddies of mine, so they're pretty easy to spot, the prisoner said. Come with me. When we approach, I want you to move your friends away. Can you do that? Tatum asked. The prisoner was confused but nodded in approval. Good. Let's move, Tatum said. Tatum snapped his fingers, getting the attention of Devin and Eric, who immediately went into business mode and followed. They marched across the gym, allowing the prisoner to take point. As he got within view of his friends, he bobbed his head to either side, getting them to slide away from Carter. "Where the hell are you guys going?" Sergeant Carter barked. The prisoner stepped to the side, allowing Tatum to dart into the bleachers. He grabbed onto Carter's shirt collar and yanked him down to the ground. The impact knocked the breath out of him and began to cause a commotion amongst the other prisoners. Before Tatum could speak, he heard Church clear his throat into a microphone to get his attention. Tatum looked up, seeing the confusion on Church's face. "Eric, Devin, get this son of a bitch out of here. Wait in a classroom for me," Tatum ordered. The two men did as ordered, grabbing the sergeant off the ground and escorting him out of the gym. Reed turned his attention to the confused prisoners, making up a believable excuse while Tatum gave Church a thumbs up. "Alrighty then, hello, is this thing on? Can everybody hear me okay?" Church's voice echoed through the gym. A smattering of acknowledgments came from the back rows of the bleachers, prompting Church to continue. Wonderful. I'm sure you all have a million different questions, and I'd love to say that I have the answers. But I'm not going to bullshit you. A lot of what you're about to do is going to have to be based on faith, Church said. Church paused for a moment to let that thought wash over the crowd before continuing. "First off, let's get the formalities out of the way. You may call me Church, but given how there are 300 or 400 of you, please do your best to not talk to me. I'm terrible with names, and I'll go ahead and tell you right now, I'm not going to remember yours. That being said, I am here to offer you something that nobody else on this planet can. A chance at redemption." Church paused, thinking hard for a moment before shaking his head and continuing. "No, wait, redemption isn't the right word. Vengeance? No, that's a little too harsh. Retribution? Yeah, that's a good word. So I'm offering you the chance to get retribution against those who have wrongly imprisoned you, taken away your dignity, and in some cases taken away the lives of your friends and comrades." Before he could continue, a random voice in the crowd yelled out, "What do we get in return?" Church was a little taken aback by the sudden yelling, but he chuckled to himself before continuing. "Please hold all questions until the end, however, as that was a very good one, I'll go ahead and answer it. In return for helping us, you get to punish the people who harmed you, hence the word retribution. However, as those spokespeople on late-night television infomercials used to say, but wait, there's more. You'll be given your freedom and protection under our militia. We would prefer that you stay here in Spokane, but once things have solidified, you'll be free to go wherever you would like. However, if that deal doesn't sound good to you, raise your hands and I'll have my men escort you back to your holding rooms. However, I must warn you that there won't be guards here to bring you food, so if you choose that option, I hope you had a big lunch." The prisoners began exchanging looks with one another before everyone in the crowd began nodding in agreement. After a few moments, several of them yelled out in support, eventually building to the entire room erupting. "That's what I like to hear. Now I want everybody to sit tight for a few minutes. I have an urgent matter to attend to. Then we'll be on our way," Church said, handing the microphone over to another militia member before marching over to Tatum, who motioned for him to follow out into the hallway. Rather than be his playful self, Church spoke with a rage that shocked both Tatum and Reed. "Tatum, I understand that you have been through a lot today, but if you don't tell me what in the holy fuck that was all about, we're going to have some words. And they won't be pleasant." Tatum held his hands up in a defensive position, hoping to defuse the situation. His voice carried a conciliatory tone as he spoke. "My apologies, Church. I allowed my emotions to get the better of me. The prisoner we removed from the crowd murdered civilians, people who helped with the gun runner operation, and people we had protected in the past. When I saw him, I flew off the handle, and for that, you have my sincerest apologies." Church thought about it for a moment before snapping back into his light-hearted demeanor. "I get it, Tatum. I totally get it. As a matter of fact, you just made what was going to be a very difficult decision into a very easy one. Come on, let's go meet this asshole." Tatum breathed a sigh of relief as he walked into the classroom where Eric and Devin had Sergeant Carter secured to a chair. Church walked right up to the prisoner, getting in his face but not saying a word for the longest time, just looking him up and down in a creepy manner. "Is it true?" Church asked. "Is what true?" Carter responded. Did you kill those civilians? Church asked. Carter cracked a smile, nodding. They shot first. Church immediately delivered a headbutt to the bridge of Carter's nose, causing him to groan. Church stood up, chuckling to himself as he turned back to the others. "Oh yeah, he's going to do just fine," Church said, clicking on his communicator and speaking in a low tone, so low that none of the militia could understand what he was saying. "What are you going to use him for?" Eric asked. "Well, my friend, securing the prisoners is just phase 1 of the operation. Our next stop is the military headquarters here in Spokane. And to make our lives easier in that assault, we're going to have to cause a little commotion inside the building," Church said. "How do you plan on pulling that off?" Reed asked. "Well, for starters, we have a mole on the inside that can get our new friend into the building," Church replied. "And then what?" Tatum asked. There was a knock at the door, followed by a militiaman entering, carrying a large duffel bag. He walked over to Church, setting it down on the table beside him. Church got the biggest smile any of the men had seen on anybody since the apocalypse began. The hulking beast of a man was the spitting image of pure joy. He reached into the side pocket of the bag, pulling out a thick rubber glove that scientists use when they really need to protect their skin. He spoke as he unzipped the bag and carefully reached inside. "From what our contact has told us, it can be difficult to smuggle a weapon into the headquarters, even for qualified personnel there, which means we're going to need to think outside the box if we're going to have a proper diversion," Church said. Church turned around, revealing a living zombie head in his hands. The creature that used to be a blonde-headed woman snapped her jaws, excited to eat, even though she had no stomach. Church turned to Sergeant Carter, whose face had gone white with fear, watching helplessly as fate closed in on him. "So what do you say, Sergeant? Are you ready for your close-up?" Church taunted. Carter yelled out in terror, which was replaced by the sharp pain of rotting teeth ripping at his flesh. The only thing louder than his screams was the laughter of pure joy coming from Church. The end.